Hans Kammler, the SS engineer who disappeared after the war. By early 1944, less than 20% of all Allied bombs had landed on Axis targets. In just 6 months, between January and July, tonnage increased by almost another 50%. German cities were covered in rubble. The Red Army had already broken the Wehrmacht at Kursk, and Germany would not launch a major offensive in the east again. Even so, German military production continued to grow. Millions of forced laborers kept that effort going. About a quarter of the entire Reich workforce consisted of foreign civilians and prisoners. More than 700,000 concentration camp inmates were sent every day to factories, quarries, and large-scale construction sites. The SS directed this network with administrative criteria, moving people and materials according to specific needs. Not everything was decided on the battlefronts or in public speeches. Part of the control was exercised from offices, plans, and technical orders. In that space, engineers in charge of turning political decisions into real structures acted. One of them came to concentrate an exceptional authority. At the end of the war, his trail was lost without a verifiable outcome. Who was that man and where did he end up? Hans Kammler, the origin of the terror engineer. He was born on August 26, 1901 in Stettin, a port city of the German Empire in the region of Pomerania. His father was a state official and worked within a Prussian administration marked by discipline, hierarchy, and strict respect for the rules. He grew up in a family environment linked to the state apparatus, where public service and obedience were part of everyday life. From childhood, he was educated under the traditional Prussian model, with an emphasis on academic performance, discipline, and subordination to authority. After completing his basic education, Kammler turned to technical studies, a choice consistent with the context of a Germany that, after the First World War, sought to rebuild itself through engineering, planning, and administration. During the 1920s, he studied civil engineering at higher education institutions in Danzig and later in Munich. His training was rigorous and specialized, focused on construction planning, and organization of large projects. These studies culminated in obtaining a doctorate, an achievement that placed him within a technical elite capable of aspiring to relevant positions within the state administration. The Germany in which Kammler was trained was going through deep political and economic instability. The Weimar Republic faced inflation, unemployment, and institutional crisis, factors that affected an entire generation of young professionals. In this context, many engineers and technicians began to see nationalism as a way to restore order, stability, and the lost prestige of the country. Kammler was no exception. For him, the problem was not only political, but organizational. Germany, in his view, needed more efficient structures, a centralized leadership, and an administration capable of imposing discipline. In 1931, Kammler joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party and the Schutzstaffel, the SS, 2 years before Adolf Hitler came to power. His early affiliation placed him within a small group of technicians who supported the Nazi movement before its consolidation. Within the party and the SS, Kammler did not stand out as an orator or as an ideologue, but as a professional with technical training oriented to the management, planning, and execution of complex projects. His profile fit with a sector of the movement that conceived the future of the regime as a matter of organization and control rather than rhetoric. During the early years of the Third Reich, Kammler began working on state-linked construction projects. In the mid-1930s, he was incorporated into the Reich Ministry of Aviation, where he participated in infrastructure-related tasks for the Luftwaffe. There he was in charge of the planning and supervision of works, applying criteria of efficiency, standardization, and speed in execution. His work was carried out within a bureaucratic apparatus that valued concrete results and the ability to carry out orders without question. In that administrative environment, Kammler demonstrated skills that went beyond structural calculation. He knew how to move within the hierarchy, coordinate technical teams, and meet deadlines under pressure. These capabilities made him visible to higher-ranking figures within the state apparatus and the SS. Among those who noticed his performance was Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer SS, who sought to incorporate into the SS technical profiles capable of converting the ideological directives of the regime into lasting material structures. Unlike other organizations of the Nazi state, the SS was not conceived only as a police or military force, but as a comprehensive structure with administrative, economic, and technical ambitions. Within them, a bureaucracy of its own was developed, parallel to that of the traditional state, aimed at managing territories, resources, and personnel. Kammler fit naturally into that model. His background as an engineer and his administrative experience made him an ideal candidate to take on responsibilities within that expanding structure. During the second half of the 1930s, Kammler consolidated his career within the technical framework of the regime. He was not an isolated civil servant, but part of a network of engineers, architects, and administrators who shared the same vision: the belief that political and social problems could be solved through planning, control, and rational organization. For Kammler, technology was not an end in itself, but a tool at the service of a system that demanded obedience and absolute efficiency. In those years, his work focused on state-building projects that required coordination between different agencies, private companies, and party bodies. This experience allowed him to develop a way of working based on the centralization of decisions and the elimination of bureaucratic obstacles. He learned to operate within complex structures, to impose high work rhythms, and to demand results with no room for improvisation. These practices would be fundamental in the later stages of their career. At the same time, Kammler rose through the ranks within the SS not because of visible ideological merits, but because of his technical utility. Its profile responded to an internal transformation of the organization, which began to depend more and more on specialists capable of managing large systems. In this process, the SS moved away from its initial image as the Führer's personal guard to become an administrative apparatus with the capacity to intervene in multiple areas of the state. By the end of the 1930s, Kammler was already part of that technical core that articulated engineering, administration, and power within the Nazi regime, a position achieved not by speeches or public gestures, but by the ability to execute specific tasks within a system that rewarded efficiency. In 1939, when Germany was preparing for a conflict on a continental scale, Kammler was in a position that reflected that evolution. He had gained experience in state building, had demonstrated loyalty to the regime, and had been fully integrated into the technical structure of the SS. His profile combined academic background, administrative discipline, and ideological alignment, a combination that made him especially valuable to an organization that was about to dramatically expand its field of action. The expansion of the SS, build to control. In 1940, Hans Kammler was transferred to the Wirtschafts- und Verwaltungshauptamt, known as the WWII. It was the office that handled the resources of the SS and decided what was to be built, where and by what means, both within Germany and in the occupied territories. From that moment on, Kammler went to work under the direct authority of Oswald Pohl, the man who concentrated the economic and administrative power of the SS and who answered only to the top of the regime. Shortly after arriving, Kammler was placed in charge of Amtsgruppe C, the area in charge of all SS constructions. From there, he began to control a huge range of projects: barracks, factories, warehouses, administrative buildings, and, increasingly, concentration camps. It was not a symbolic post. Under his command, it was decided how the works were carried out, what resources were used, and whether the works advanced or stopped. In practice, everything passed through his hands. Their arrival coincided with an accelerated expansion of the concentration system. Existing fields began to grow, and new facilities were planned based on their location, transportation routes, and labor availability. Kammler applied the same logic he already knew: build fast, make the most of space, and don't waste resources. What changed was the purpose of those works and the fate of those who would end up inside. Between 1941 and 1943, his office was directly involved in the expansion of Auschwitz, which was transformed from a prison camp into an industrial-scale complex. Kammler was not on the sidelines. He signed orders, reviewed plans, and made key decisions. The new barracks, the internal systems, and the organization of the space responded to a precise logic: to increase the capacity and ensure the continuous operation of the place. In the same period, similar works were carried out at Majdanek and in other camps under SS control. These projects replicated the scheme already applied in previous installations, which made it possible to quickly expand the capacity of the fields and extend the system to different parts of the occupied territory without altering its basic structure. A key part of Kammler's work was to coordinate the private companies building these facilities. Companies specializing in furnaces, ventilation systems, and industrial construction worked under the direct control of the SS. Kammler acted as an intermediary between these companies and the administrative leadership, making sure that each construction site fulfilled its function. Decisions were not made by human criteria, but by efficiency, resilience, and the ability to function without interruptions. During this period, cremation facilities were developed and expanded within the concentration complexes. These structures were not improvised. They required calculations of temperature, fuel consumption, ventilation, and material strength. Kammler oversaw the integration of these systems within the field as a whole, ensuring that they were connected to the overall logistics network. Their participation was reflected in technical documents, authorizations, and work schedules. The growth of the concentration camp system also implied a reorganization of forced labor. The prisoners were integrated as permanent labor in the construction, expansion, and maintenance of the facilities. From an administrative perspective, this system made it possible to reduce costs and accelerate projects without depending on the civilian labor market. Kammler accepted and applied this model as a normal part of the construction process. Working conditions, mortality, and human exhaustion were not part of the technical calculations that guided their decisions. As his authority was consolidated, Kammler began to carry out personal inspections in different complexes. These visits were of a technical nature. It evaluated the status of the works, compliance with deadlines, and the adequacy of the facilities to the objectives set. Later testimonies placed Kammler in Auschwitz in 1942 during key phases of the camp's expansion. Their presence did not respond to ceremonies or public acts, but to operational reviews. Kammler's relationship with Oswald Pohl was strictly functional. Pohl expected measurable results, completed projects, controlled budgets, and expansions executed as planned. Kammler met these requirements, which allowed it to operate with a considerable margin of autonomy. Within the WWII, Amtsgruppe C became one of the most active and busiest divisions due to the constant expansion of the concentration system. At the same time, Kammler maintained a direct relationship with Heinrich Himmler, who closely followed the construction projects of the SS. Himmler valued Kammler's ability to transform general guidelines into concrete physical structures. This relationship strengthened Kammler's position within the hierarchy and protected him from outside interference. As long as he delivered results, his margin of action remained intact. Between 1942 and the beginning of 1943, the volume of works managed by Amtsgruppe C increased steadily. New fields, subfields, and extensions were incorporated into the system. Planning became increasingly centralized, with Kammler as a key figure in technical decision-making. The logic was clear: build fast, build a lot, and ensure that the facilities could operate continuously under extreme conditions. This period marked a turning point in Kammler's career. Their work was no longer limited to conventional state infrastructure. He now directed a constructive system directly linked to the repressive policy of the SS. Each approved plan, each completed work, and each extension executed reinforced a framework that depended on engineering and organization to operate on a large scale. By mid-1943, the context of the war began to change the regime's priorities. The Allied bombing raids on German territory intensified the pressure on industry and infrastructure. The vulnerability of surface installations became evident. Within that scenario, Kammler's technical and administrative capabilities took on new value. The experience accumulated in the construction of complex systems, his control over resources, and his ability to impose extreme work rhythms placed him at the center of decisions that would soon go beyond the concentration system. War underground, secret weapons, and forced labor. On the night of August 17th to 18th, 1943, the war took a decisive turn for the German military industry. British aircraft bombed the Peenemünde Research Center, where the V-2 rockets were being developed. The attack destroyed key buildings, killed technicians, and made it clear that no strategic project was safe on the surface. For the regime, the message was immediate. If it wanted to continue producing advanced weapons, it had to hide them underground. Hans Kammler was the man chosen to solve that problem. By this time, he was already in control of the construction of the SS and had experience organizing huge projects under pressure. Following the bombardment, it was given direct authority to move rocket production to underground facilities. This was not a limited task. It was a large-scale operation with urgent deadlines and no margin for failure. The site selected was a former gypsum mine in the Kohnstein Massif near Nordhausen. Mittelwerk was created there, an underground factory designed to produce the V2 out of the reach of Allied bombing. Kammler took control of the project from the beginning. He decided on the pace, the resources, and the way of working. To supply the complex with manpower, the Mittelbau-Dora camp was created, initially as a Buchenwald subcamp. The conditions inside the tunnels were extreme. The prisoners worked underground, with little ventilation, constant dust, and endless hours. Many slept inside the mine for the first few months. Production was advancing at the same time as deaths from exhaustion, illness, and accidents were increasing. Kammler was aware of this situation. Even so, their priority was to meet the established production targets. Under his direction, the tunnels were expanded and reorganized to function as assembly lines. Assembly, storage, and internal transport areas were installed. Everything was designed so that the rockets would leave the mine ready to be sent to the launch bases. The system worked with a simple logic: produce quickly, produce a lot, and replace without delay those who could not continue working. By the end of 1943, Mittelwerk was already delivering the first operational V2s. Throughout 1944, production increased steadily. Thousands of rockets were made, although the exact number varies according to records. What is documented is that the number of prisoners killed on Dora exceeded the casualties caused by the V2s themselves in the cities attacked. That reflects the direct human cost of the project Kammler led. The technical success of the underground transfer further elevated Kammler's position within the regime. He began reporting directly to Heinrich Himmler and the Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer. Speer was in charge of setting production goals. Kammler controlled everything else: facilities, labor, security, and logistics. That division of functions gave him real power that few could question. In March 1944, Kammler expanded his influence with the creation of the Jägerstab, a special structure intended to speed up the production of fighter aircraft. The Luftwaffe was losing the air war and desperately needed new fighters. Kammler again applied the same solution: disperse and hide production, move it to underground factories, and use forced labor to keep up. Under the Jägerstab, projects such as the Me-262, the first operational jet fighter, came largely under its control. Kammler coordinated the relocation of plants, the relocation of technicians, and the adaptation of tunnels and shelters for aircraft production. His authority was extended over multiple programs at the same time. Rockets, planes, facilities, transport, and personnel were within his sphere of decision. As his power grew, so did the fear he aroused within the Nazi apparatus itself. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, saw some of his influence erode. Speer later described Kammler as a cold, disciplined, and dangerous man, especially at a time when the regime was crumbling. Kammler did not depend on speeches or popularity. He depended on results, and he delivered them. During 1944, Allied bombing intensified. Cities, factories, and transport lines were constantly attacked. Kammler responded with more decentralization and more control. Every major project had to adapt to the underground or dispersed model. Decisions were made quickly and executed without discussion. Those who did not comply were replaced. Direct violence was also part of this stage. In March 1945, as Allied units advanced through Western Germany, mass executions of forced laborers took place in the Arnsberg forest. The victims were prisoners used in projects related to construction and transportation. Kammler was involved in the chain of command that ordered these actions, aimed at preventing prisoners from falling alive into enemy hands. Meanwhile, at Dora and other compounds, mortality continued to rise. Exhaustion, hunger, and working conditions caused thousands of deaths. Kammler did not intervene to modify that system. From his perspective, labor was one more resource within a production process that had to continue at any cost. In late 1944, Kammler reached one of the highest points of his career. Adolf Hitler appointed him plenipotentiary general for jet aviation, giving him authority over the latest technological projects in which the regime placed its hopes. That appointment placed him above traditional structures and allowed him to act with almost total independence. By then, Kammler controlled a network of hidden facilities, underground factories, labor camps, and technical equipment scattered throughout Germany and nearby territories. Their power did not come from a symbolic position, but from the ability to decide what was built, where, and with what resources. In an increasingly fragmented Reich, that ability made him a central figure. However, the context no longer played in his favor. By early 1945, the Allied advance from the west and the Soviet push from the east compressed German-controlled territory. Supply lines were broken, communications failed, and many installations fell intact into enemy hands. Still, Kammler continued to issue orders and reorganize projects, trying to keep a crumbling system running. By January 1945, the picture was clear. The war was lost. Secret weapons had not changed the course of the conflict. The underground factories were still producing, but they could no longer alter the final result. Kammler, who had amassed more power than many other leaders, now found himself in an unstable environment, with overlapping authorities and a command structure that was beginning to disintegrate. That moment marked the end of the era in which Kammler was the most powerful engineer in the Third Reich. From then on, the priority would no longer be to build or produce, but to move within a collapsing country, make quick decisions, and prepare for what would come when the system it had served ceased to exist. The final destination. In February 1945, Germany's military situation was critical. Soviet forces were advancing from the east and Allied armies were pressing from the west. The territory controlled by the Reich was rapidly shrinking and many strategic installations were isolated. In this context, Hans Kammler continued to hold a position with broad responsibilities over technical projects and specialized personnel, although the chain of command was beginning to fragment. During those final weeks, Kammler was involved in evacuation operations of key facilities and personnel. Scientists, engineers, and technicians were ordered to be transferred from threatened areas to southern Germany and Austria. These movements sought to prevent specialized personnel from falling into enemy hands, especially in areas related to advanced weaponry. There are records that Kammler coordinated part of these evacuations, issuing direct orders and reorganizing routes according to the advance of the fronts. At the same time, orders were issued for the destruction of documents and facilities. In various complexes under SS control, subordinate units were instructed to dispose of files, plans, and administrative records. The goal was to prevent sensitive information from being captured intact. These orders are documented in subsequent messages and testimonies, although it is not always possible to determine the extent to which they were carried out in each place. In March 1945, Kammler continued to move within German territory. Their presence was registered in different locations, always associated with coordination and withdrawal tasks. During this period, he maintained contact with high-level technical personnel. Among them were scientists linked to the development of weapons, who were given instructions on movements and possible selective surrenders. These meetings were not public, and their content is only partially known through subsequent statements. In early April 1945, Kammler moved his headquarters southwards, establishing his headquarters temporarily in Munich. From there, he continued to issue orders related to evacuations and personnel movements. There are telegrams bearing his name and dating from these dates, addressed to units in places such as Leitmeritz and Mittelwerk, in which instructions are reiterated to destroy material and abandon positions. One of the best documented encounters of this period took place on April 22, 1945, in Oberammergau, a Bavarian town near the Alps. There, Kammler met with several engineers and scientists related to rocket and aviation projects. Witnesses who survived the war recalled that encounter as a meeting in which the possibility of surrendering to US forces rather than falling into Soviet hands was discussed. Kammler was described at the time as calm and pragmatic, focused on organizing a viable way out of the general collapse. After that meeting, Kammler's movements become more difficult to follow accurately. It is known that it traveled southeast, possibly in the direction of Salzburg and Linz, although there is no completely confirmed route. The last verified contact with his close environment occurred around April 26, 1945, when communications were abruptly interrupted. However, on May 7, 1945, when Germany was already negotiating its surrender, a message signed by Kammler arrived at an SS unit at Leitmeritz. In that telegram, the order to destroy archives and evacuate the area was reiterated. The authenticity of the message has been debated, but its existence is recorded. If genuine, it indicates that Kammler was still alive at least 2 days before the Reich's official capitulation. After that point, there are no confirmed sightings or direct records of Kammler. In the following days and weeks, different versions began to circulate about his fate. One of them maintains that he committed suicide on May 9, 1945, near Prague, after ordering his driver to leave him alone. Another version claims that he was executed by members of his own entourage. None of these versions could be verified with physical evidence, since no body was ever recovered or a grave identified. Despite the lack of certainties, the Allied authorities closed the matter relatively quickly. In the months after the end of the war, Kammler's name appeared in American and British intelligence reports. The investigators knew who he was and knew his involvement in weapons projects and in the infrastructure of the camps. Even so, all formal searches ended without conclusive results. In November 1945, a senior intelligence official in the US Air Force ordered the search to be reopened after receiving reports suggesting that Kammler may have been in US custody. British documents from the same period mentioned an SS general with detailed knowledge of rocket production in the Harz region. None of these reports included direct confirmation of arrest, interrogation, or transfer with name and surname. In post-war Germany, the matter was resolved legally. Kammler's family requested that he be officially declared dead. In September 1948, a court in Berlin-Charlottenburg ruled that Hans Kammler had died on May 9, 1945. The decision was based on affidavits from his driver and a close assistant who claimed to have witnessed or known the circumstances of his alleged death. No material evidence was presented to support these testimonies. Decades later, the case was revisited from declassified files. Some intelligence documents mention the possible arrest of a high-ranking SS officer with extensive knowledge of secret weapons, transferred to interrogation centers in southern Germany during the summer of 1945. These documents do not include a name, photograph, or fingerprints, and do not allow definitive confirmation that it was Kammler. Nor are there official interrogation records that unequivocally identify him. For that reason, Hans Kammler's ending remains without a verifiable resolution. His disappearance in the final days of the war, the accounts of his death, the subsequent search, and the legal declaration that he was presumed dead are documented, but it cannot be confirmed where he died, how he died, or whether he was in Allied custody after the collapse of the Reich. From that point on, the records become fragmentary and contradictory, and there are no official documents that allow us to trace them beyond May 1945. The story, as it can be reconstructed from verifiable sources, ends there, when verifiable data is exhausted and its fate is no longer supported by direct evidence.